We hope you enjoyed the message. If you want to hear more, click the blue icon button. Thank you very much.
Hey, we're going to go ahead and we're going to just get fired up. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open it up. We're in Luke, and you know what chapter. It's chapter 1. It's the same chapter that we've been in for 8 lessons up until this point in time. We have learned a ton together as we've gone through. Most of you can remember that Luke writes his information, his gospel. It is by far the most detailed account of the message of Jesus that we have at the beginning. And the reason being is because he's grabbing 90%, if not more, of his information from eyewitnesses of people who have been there. And so we are taking, honestly, for the last 8 weeks, we've been looking at one continuous story. And we've looked at just some in-depth stuff regarding the birth of John the Baptist and the eventual, we're not there yet, but the eventual birth of Jesus, and just kind of how God had worked through that with the angel Gabriel. And Gabriel spoke to Elizabeth, who is John the Baptist's mom, and Mary, who eventually is Jesus' mom. Mary is just barely pregnant at this time. And I was thinking as I was looking at this lesson this morning, because you can see, if you see that we're going to be in verse 80, we're skipping a lot. And we're skipping that the birth of John the Baptist a little bit. We're skipping Zacharias. It's not that we're skipping it 100%. I'll give you some detailed information here in a minute. And we're skipping a little bit of even Zacharias' prophecy. I mean, remember, he's been mute for the last at least 9.5 months because he didn't believe that his wife, even though she was old, could get pregnant. And there's some reasons why. It's because I'm going to look at a very obscure passage that we kind of simply miss. This morning as we jump ahead, I'm going to just kind of get you caught up. Verses 57 through 58, John the Baptist is born. That's an amazing event. Few verses later, from 59 to 66, verse 66, John the Baptist is circumcised. And the uniqueness of that event, remember, if you've read this, that's where Zacharias begins to speak, because everybody wanted to name John the Baptist something else. And God finally opens up his mouth and he says, nope, his name's going to be John. Verses 67 through 79, Zacharias is allowed to talk, and he goes into a lengthy prophecy. He goes into a lengthy prophecy of a lot of praise of God and admiration and just some future events. Though we're skipping those parts this morning, they are going to be brought back up as we begin looking at the message of John the Baptist. John the Baptist is going to go into the wilderness. We're going to talk about that. But when he jumps back on scene, when Israel is ready, when Jesus is ready, John the Baptist is going to use a majority of the message that his dad prophesies over. So you're going to hear that part again. But what I found in verse 80 is unique as it relates to John the Baptist. And so if you have a Bible, go ahead and open it up. We're going to be looking at one verse. It's a unique and individual verse. Luke chapter 1, verse 80. It says this: "So the child grew and became strong in spirit, and was in the deserts till the day of his manifestation to Israel." So there's a little background here that we've kind of talked about. Remember, Luke is grabbing eyewitness information from the people who were there and saw this. Luke writes a bunch of information that leads up to the birth of John the Baptist. Luke writes in our verse that the child grew and became strong in spirit and hung out in the deserts until it was time for him to begin his ministry. There's a couple questions that you will not find answered. How old was John when he went into the desert? We haven't the slightest idea. But the way in which this is recorded, or way in which that Luke writes this, he was probably out there in the desert for years upon years upon years upon years. So at some point, probably when he was a young adult, I don't know, most people believe a teenager, he just left the scene. He left his family and all that and just went straight out into the desert, and he stayed out there for a while. And there's a reason being for the desert. One thing that is glaring in the Bible is that God often uses desert experiences to get his people ready for service. I'm going to be in great length, and we're just going to talk about a desert experience. You see, sometimes in this life we go through difficult things. And the difficult things in our life that we go through can be for reasons and for a purpose. Sometimes we look at the difficult experiences that we go through in our life and we begin questioning, God, why am I going through this? God, why does this season in my life have to be so difficult and so hard? You see, often through the Bible, as we're going to learn here in just a few moments, God often uses desert experiences to prepare us for something. Okay, and that's what we're going to look at for just a little bit. So let's just start off with, what is a desert? Most of you in this room have probably been to the desert a few times. Physically, it's a dry, often barren, and hot environment. Not much rain comes to the desert, and so whatever is there has to be tough in order to survive. Some of you have been to those deserts. You've been out there. You've been in Arizona. You've been in California, New Mexico, wherever you've been. So even parts of the high desert in Idaho, and you get out there in the middle of summer, and it's just hot. It's hotter than the devil's armpit. I mean, you guys didn't catch it, okay. It's just super hot, right? I mean, it's just so bad. The temperatures in the desert, listen to what the Google said, can be well past 100 for months upon months on end, right? And you've been in those environments sometimes, and it's just like, oh man, is the heat ever going to shut off, right? You've been there. And it's interesting because it can get hot here, like kind of, right? It can get hot, but one of the things it does here is it cools off. Right, at night it cools off, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, that breeze starts blowing off the water and it cools us down. One of the things that I cannot stand about the desert, it never cools off. It's hot. It's hot. I mean, hot as hot can be. And you would think that if you went outside at 5:30 in the morning, there would at least be cool. No. I've been in deserts before where I jumped out at 5:30 in the morning before the sun even came up, and it's still already past 100 degrees. Already, it is hot. Many people who wander into the deserts often die because they're not prepared for the harsh environments. Some of you have been there. You've been on those hikes. Maybe it's been in Death Valley, California, or some of the other places you've been. Big, huge warning signs before you even go on the trail. Be careful. Take plenty of fluid with you, right? And you know what the bottom line most people ignore? Stay on the trail. In big, bold letters usually, do not wander off. Why? They can't find you when you walk off into the desert, and they know that your survival rating is low if you begin wandering off. You're going to learn relatively fast in a desert environment. You think you're going to find water. It's not like Seattle. There are not rivers and lakes everywhere. You're going to wander off and you're going to be without water. One of the stories that I like that reminds me of the desert and just how much I hate the desert, and I'm so glad God has me here in Seattle. I took a job as a utility foreman years and years ago, almost 20 years ago, and one of the things that they did for us is they sent us to school. And they sent us to the school and the training down in Phoenix, Arizona. Well, I was in Idaho, okay? We got down to Phoenix, Arizona, and one of the things they loved to get all of their trainees gathered in Phoenix, Arizona in June, July, and August was when the school was. The hottest time of the year by far. When they say that you can see the waves of the heat bouncing off the pavement, I have been there and I've seen it myself. It is brutally hot. I was about 3 or 4 days into the school, trying my hardest. But the heat was so bad for me and so intense that you guys know what happens when you begin losing a lot of water over days. You could try really hard to replenish yourself. It's extremely difficult to keep up. I mean, it just really is. You have to drink gallons upon gallons of water. And I went to the boss. His name was Mike. And I was all, bro, I'm just not doing good. I'm just not doing good. I just came from Idaho. It was at the most 80 degrees. I mean, that's hot for Idaho. 85 is a scorcher for Idaho. That day in which I went and talked to Mike, I think it was well past 111, and we're working right in the city. And they call it asphalt heat because they call Phoenix actually the asphalt jungle. That's their name for it, not mine, okay? Because that asphalt can warm up and the heat just swelters. It's actually hotter where we were working by the ground than it is just standing straight up. I mean, it is just hot. He looked at me and he said this, some people just aren't cut out for this. There's no get more water. There is no one of that, honey, why don't you go sit in the air conditioner in the truck or anything. He just looked at me square in the eyes and he said, hey, some people just aren't cut out for this line of work. That's why we have this training in the summer here. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not going to allow this to beat me. It may be hot, but there's no way. I've got a wife and a young boy, and I mean, my other son, Colby wasn't on the way yet. But man, ain't no way in the world somebody's going to look me square in the eyes and tell me I'm not cut out for this. And I remember thinking, I got to figure out how to survive. I got to figure out how to survive in this environment. I'm not used to it. I don't like it. I want to get out of here as soon as possible. Well, how do you do it? You just figure it out. You drink more water. I went to a guy who had been working in the desert in Yuma, which is actually hotter than Phoenix. I went to him, and his name was Griffin, and man, he was acting like every day was 70 degrees. I said, what do you do, man? How do you survive? He's like, you got to train. This is what he said. You have to train your mind. He's like, to me right now, though it's hot, I'm on the beach somewhere just relaxing. He said the heat is 90% of the battle in your mind. 90%. And I'm thinking, wow, really? And so that's what I did. I started just imagining I was back in Alaska where it's nice and cool, right? It's something that you have to do in your mind to prepare yourself for that hot environment. I know it sounds weird and goofy, but listen, you got to have something. I remember a few weeks later, Mike came to me, the boss, and he's like, you seem to be doing great. And I said, it's because I'm in Alaska, bro. It's not that hot here, right? It's just not that hot. Do you know that there were lots and lots and lots of people who came through that school? I mean, fast. Guys would come for just days and leave. Some guys would make it for a week, maybe, sometimes even 2 weeks. Some guys could ace the tests, and they were extremely difficult tests. But the weather in that hot environment, because they had not trained their mind to stay in that hot environment and not allow that hot environment to they just quit. They just quit left and right, left and right. So that's just physical. Most of you have been there physically. You've been in one of those hot environments. It was because of those hot environments in Phoenix that they were able to take a select group of us and drop us into Needles, California, where it was well past 119 every single day. And because we spent the time in Phoenix and prepared our minds, we were able to work in those environments without a problem. You see, that's the idea. Those are just physical. What about spiritual? You see, the Bible talks about the physical side, which is difficult. It's hard sometimes. I get it. But there's also spiritual deserts that we go through. There's also sometimes these hot or harsh, barren spiritual environments that we go through. These are often characterized by struggle. Right? Often characterized by struggle in your life. There's those times in your life where it's just hard. Where you find it even easy, or you even find it difficult to do the things you once thought easy. Right? Those are desert experiences. It's those times in which sometimes, remember, you were passionately in love with the Bible and it was no big deal for you. Remember those times you became a Christian or whatever it was, or maybe it was a few years later, and you just devoured. Now, for some, you haven't touched it for a while. And you find it, listen, hard. You find it hard to get to. What about praying? There's times in your life where you're just pumped to pray. It's like, man, you're doing the James verses, like James 5, you're praying without ceasing like crazy. I mean, you're just constantly, you wake up in the morning, you're thanking God. You're not just praying over your meals, you're praying as you're in your car. And you're just not shooting these little prayers. Remember, there's times in your life where you're just devoured in prayer. What's a desert experience? Sometimes you go through moments, well, listen, you even find that difficult. It's harder to pray. And sometimes you don't know why it's hard to read your Bible. Sometimes you don't know why it's hard to pray. A lot of times we like to think, well, maybe I've sinned. Maybe there's some sin in my life that's stopping me from praying. Maybe there's some sin in my life that's stopping me from reading the Bible. But listen, God gives you a brain to figure things out, and you just can't figure out what it is. Maybe it's not a sin that's blocking you from praying. Maybe you're in a desert experience. Right? Maybe you're there. John the Baptist spent years upon years upon years in the desert. Did you know that God often loves to use desert experiences? Do you know because the children of Israel disobeyed God, they spent 40 years in the desert. All the Bible tells us about that 40 years is they wandered around constantly. Why? Because they did not learn a lesson. And a generation had to die because they didn't learn a lesson. And so God used a desert experience for 40 years. Listen, I I could not wait to get out of Phoenix, Arizona. I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait until the boss came and said, you know, the group of us that were still in that class after the months upon months said, you graduated, you passed. I couldn't wait. They're like, hey, is anybody ready to go? I'm like, yo, I'm out. I didn't know they were sending me to Needles, California, real close to Death Valley. We worked in those deserts out there, and I was like, oh man, I should have stayed in Phoenix. But when that job finally ended, they're like, who's ready to go? I'm like, before I raise my hand, where are we going? You sending me over to Saudi Arabia or something? No. They're like, California. I'm like, what part? I'm already in California. They're like, Paso Robles. I'm like, what's the temperature like? Average is 60 to 70 degrees year round. Sign me up. Get me out of this desert as fast as you can. Right? That's a reality. Now, spiritually, it's the same way. Sometimes we're going through these difficult things in our life, and we don't embrace it, but the reality is we're there and it's needful. What about Elijah? Remember, he had that time with King Ahab. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. Like God tells him, King Ahab, you're messing around with Jezebel. Elijah, go tell King Ahab that you're being dumb. And he does, right? King Ahab and Jezebel, boy, they get fired up. What's Elijah do? Runs to the desert and hides out in the desert. It's so bad for him that he has to be fed by birds. Right? He's there for a long, long time. Jesus, right? Isn't he in the desert for 40 days being tempted by the devil for 40 days without food and water? What's he doing there? He's preparing himself. Paul says it at least 2 times in the book of Galatians that he's in the desert. And he says the desert experiences, even for Paul, being from that part of the country, even for him, it's super difficult. Job spends time in the desert, and John the Baptist does as well. You see, there are times in our life where we're going through these things that are difficult spiritually. And we begin wondering. Some people sometimes they go, Pastor John, I used to love coming to church. I have no problem with you, no problem with the worship team, no problem with it. I'm just finding it difficult now. What's wrong with me? Maybe nothing. Maybe not a thing. Maybe it's not sin. Maybe you're just going through a desert experience. Right? Maybe you're just struggling with some things. Many people in the Bible went through desert experiences, and there are 4 reasons why. And I'm going to do these fast, because some other elements of the service we're adding in. One of the times that I know of, and these are not in particular order. I know some of you see my notes sometimes and you think that I make up the order on purpose. No. This is just what I see for me as an individual. Sometimes when I'm going through the desert experiences and beginning to realize that whatever I'm going through is difficult and hard, I go back to the scripture and I start asking questions. Why? Why? Why am I finding it hard to read my Bible? Why am I finding it hard to pray? Why am I finding it difficult to come to church? Why am I finding it difficult to share my faith? So one of the things that I begin to do is I internalize and I begin looking at me. Oh, is it sin? Is it sin that's got me? If it is, right, and that happens to us as Christians too. If it's sin that gets me, I just instantly confess that and move away from it. But if I still find myself in that desert experience and I realize it's not sin, I start asking other questions. Number 1, God, why did you use desert experiences? First one that you find, especially with the children of Israel, is to test them. Test them. God tested them. Didn't they just send their 12, I'm going to do this fast. They sent their 12 spies into the promised land. They came back to them and looked back and said, yeah, man, the promised land is for us. The other 10 are like, no way, man, there's giants over there. What did God say? He cursed them and told them to walk in the desert for 40 years because it was a test. A test to see if they would pass the test and what? Believe in Him. Do we fully believe in Him? Do we believe in the things that He spoke over us? Listen, a lot of times we're going through tests and we look at the tests that we're going through and we're like, oh man, this is bad. We have an opportunity. You can pass the test or you can fail. Or you can pass. You can make up your mind when you're going through a desert experience or something difficult, you can make up your mind. God, with your help, I'm going to pass this baby. I'm going to pass it. I ain't going to let this thing fail me. I'm not going to let this thing take me out. This is hard. This is difficult. One thing I realize is you're unchanging. You're the same yesterday, today, and forever. And as we learned last week, you're never going to leave my side. I'm staying in. Some of the hardest experiences in your life can become some of your best experiences over time. Right? Those things, those hot environments, those hard environments sometimes that you think are breaking you are actually shaping and molding you. They're forming you into something else. We as a culture and as a society just don't like tests. Or you don't. Did you like it when you were in school and the teacher got up in front of the class and said, "Pop quiz"? Nah, come on. You didn't sign up and say, "Yeah, I'm so ready." Right? Well, maybe some of you did. You're looking at me like you were. All right. I hated those. I'm like, man, you could have told us. Right? And there's all that pressure. But testing is good for us. It is. Two things it allows you to do. Number one, it allows you to see where you are. It allows you to see where you are. Of course, academically, that's what testing is for. We get it. Well, don't worry about the academic side. Worry about the personal side. When I am being tested, it allows me to evaluate me and see where I am. It also, though God knows in His full knowledge, it allows God to see where you are and reveal where you are. You pass that test, it's a great thing. Remember those pop quizzes you got in your list? You passed, you got your 100, or I don't know. I know the grading system is completely 100% changed. I see grades on my twins' papers that they bring home. I don't even know what it means. And so I have to look at them and say, did you pass? They're like, yeah, I did great. And I was like, okay, whatever that means. So back in my day, if you did really good, you got 100, okay? So I know things have changed drastically, but you did that pop quiz and you got your 100 and you're just like, yeah, I passed it. I might have been fearful about the information, but it was in there, right? I knew it. If you didn't know the information, you wouldn't have passed. See, God's not going to allow you to go through a test that you're not prepared for, right? He's always going to give you a way out of that test or give you a way through it. Two, the hard one, sometimes you go through desert experiences because you need correction. Children of Israel spent 40 years in the desert because they needed to be corrected by their disobedience. Their lack of faith, to be more specific. They needed that. They needed that time of pain and agony and testing and wanting and humidity, probably no humidity, but the heat, in order to correct some of their behavior. Listen, next time you're going through it, it might not always be sin. Maybe it's, I guess negative thinking is a sin too, but maybe it's just the way we're processing things. Right? Maybe we have a bad attitude towards individuals. Maybe we have a bad attitude towards ourselves. Maybe sometimes we have a bad attitude towards church or Bible reading or praying or people. Right? And so God will allow His children to wander and put us in the desert sometimes in order to correct our behavior. And we shouldn't look at those times in our life and say, darn it, man, God's corrected me. We should say, thank you for caring enough about me to correct my behavior. That's the only reason why parents, hopefully, correct their children. Right? However they do it, if they stick them in a corner, stick them on a chair, or whatever they do, if they spank them, whatever, that's parents' responsibility. They're doing it in order to correct the child's behavior. Why? Because they can see better. Right? They can see something more pure. And in order to correct that behavior, sometimes it takes drastic measures. Right? Right? In order sometimes to correct our thinking and our mind and our actions. Sometimes God has to use drastic measures to correct us. Instead of looking at that, Paul said, and rebuking the correcting hand of God, we should stand back and say, God, at least you love me enough to correct me. You could let me just wander around. You could, but you don't. You love me enough. You care for me enough in order to correct me. Number 3, John the Baptist probably spent significant years in the desert. We don't know. We know Jesus spends at least 40 days to prepare them for something. We need hot, harsh environments in our life sometimes. We need those desert experiences. We don't like them, right? I already told you physically, I don't like the desert. But it was there, it was needful to prepare me to realize that physically, as long as I set my mind in motion, I can get through things with God's help. I can do it. If 90% of the battle going through a hot environment is in my mind, well, that's me. That's my choice to get through that. Instead of blaming somebody else, I take responsibility for it. What does it do? It prepares you physically to stay there. Right? You see those athletes running marathons in the desert when it's 120 or you look at them like you're going to die. No. I mean, well, maybe some of them do. The majority of them live because they've taken the time to train themselves in those harsh environments. And they do some of the most superhuman stuff that I think on the planet. If anybody can run in the desert of 115 degrees for miles upon miles on end, I don't care what they look like physically, they are a superhuman in my book. Right? They are superhuman because they've taken the time to train themselves. The same way, spiritually, there are times that we go through these hot, harsh environments spiritually in order to prepare us for something better. Right? Something better. John the Baptist needs to wander in the desert because he needs to be ready when he goes on scene in Israel. Because people are going to get so confused about who John the Baptist is, they're going to start believing he's the Messiah. Really, they're going to look at him and say, "Are you the Messiah?" He's going to have to be able, with the strength and the confidence because of his desert experience, to say, "No, there is somebody coming that is greater than I. He's so great I can't even tie his shoes. I'm not even worthy to get down and mess with his buckle on his sandal. No, that's who's coming." And John the Baptist has, because of his desert experience, is bold enough to look at people in the eyes and say, "You're sinning like crazy." He was able to go to the religious leaders of the day, and because of his desert experience and the confidence that God gave him through that, and look at those religious leaders and call them all vipers. That would have been rough. Right? Why was he able to do that? Because he spent some significant time in the desert preparing him for what God had for him. Sometimes God needs to take us to the desert because he needs to prepare us for something. So if you're in a desert experience now, there's one more, we're almost there. Instead of looking at it as a curse, look at those drier times in your life and say, "God, maybe you've led me here for a reason and for a purpose." Last one. Strengthen you. Right? Strengthens you. A couple things. Let's say them again real quick. Sometimes you go to the desert because God wants to test you. Number two, sometimes he needs to correct our behavior. That's just the way he is. Number three, of course, he wants to prepare us. Right? He knows there's a good future in order to get us ready for the things he has for us. Sometimes it takes difficult times in our life to get us strong enough to go through the thing. Right? You're not always going to win 100% of the time. You're going to lose a lot. Being a Christian is about winning more than you lose, right? With God's help, we win more than we lose. How am I going to win more if I'm not prepared to win? You don't look at a baseball team or a football team and say, "Go win." They're going to look at you like a deer in the headlights and they're going to ask you, "How?" You're going to practice until you hate practicing. You practice way more than you play. I mean, you just practice 5 days for baseball. I mean, when I 5 days, if they would have allowed us to have a 6th day when I coached, I would have took it. But under the rules of Washington State, I was not allowed. It was 5 days. From the time in which we were allowed to practice until the time in which I think they allowed us to practice two hours a day for 5 days a week. That's it. How long do you play? You're practicing 10 hours a week. How long are you playing? Maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2. You're practicing way more than you're playing. Why? Because you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared. You need to be prepared. Number 4, you need to be strengthened. Sometimes God allows you to go through desert experiences to strengthen you. Right? In order to get strong physically, you have to work out. You have to. If you want to be physically strong, you have to lift weights. End of story. There is no other way. You're just not going to wake up one day and go, I'm strong now. Really? How? Well, I woke up today and decided I was strong. Okay. Let's go test that theory in the weight room. Oh, you're the same. You're exactly the same as where you were. You are not physically stronger by any stretch at all. You just think you are. Right? What does that mean? Spiritually, it's the same thing. In order to become strong spiritually, it takes us putting in the work over and over and over again. It takes us winning some of those battles in our life and realizing God didn't abandon me. I'm still here. And listen, supernaturally, over time, spiritually, you get stronger. And you get stronger. And you get stronger. And there's some things in your life that used to shake you and bother you. Maybe it was financial. Maybe it was relational. Maybe it was health issues. But you've been through them. Over and over again. Till the time you begin looking at those things and where you used to be fearful of them, you're strong now. How did you get there? You put in the work. Right? You put in the work over and over and over again. You know, Paul piggybacks on that. Most of you know because he writes 13 books in the New Testament. He says, in our strength this we're made weak, right? I get that part. Because Christ is what fulfills us or strengthens us where we are weak. True. But he goes on to even say things like, when you become strong in those areas of your life, talking to the church specifically, there's going to be other people in your life that are weak in those areas. And you become strong for you. Sure. You become strong. You lift weights for you. Sure. Spiritually, sometimes you get strong for yourself. Sure you do. But if it's just about you, isn't that boring? Right? If all life and strength is about you becoming strong, I'm just not that interested. Right? I'm just not there. Just don't want it to be all about me. That's why Paul piggybacks and says, no, it's not just for you. It's for others. They begin seeing with their eyes where you are strong, Christians. Where you were once fearful health-wise, you are now strong there. And they can look at you in the strength and say, wow, what an amazing testimony to God. Where you were once fearful and not strong financially, now maybe you're strong financially. And they can look at you and say, man, you were once fearful, but now you're just strong in the Lord. Maybe it was relationally. You were once so fearful and held on so tight to all of those relationships. Right? And every time somebody got mad, you thought you did something wrong. You had an unhealthy view of a relationship, and you were just scared. God helped you, and He walked beside you, and you got through that, and you began realizing that relationships are two ways, and sometimes people are just irritated because they're irritated, and sometimes they're just mad, and it has nothing to do with you. They're just mad. Right? And you get strong, and you get more confidence there. And people look at that and they begin saying, man, you were once really weak relationally, but now you're super strong. How did you get there? Those desert experiences in your life you didn't run from. Right? Somebody may have come to you like Mike, the boss, so I told you, he looked at me and said, not everyone makes it through these desert stuff. It's not for everybody. Maybe you looked at that and you said, this is hard, this is difficult, but with God's help, I'm getting through it. I'm not abandoning, I'm not leaving, so it's hard. What's not hard? Right? I mean, be critical in your life. What's not hard in your life? What's not? Those are the areas in which you know God's using you to strengthen you. If it's easy, is God there? He gives us times of rest. Okay, I believe that. There are easy moments. But if you can look at your life and qualify the vast majority of your life after thinking about it and saying it's been easy, you're not hanging out a lot with God. That's just the truth from the New Testament, right? If you look over your life and say, man, it's been hard, Easy a little bit. Thank you, God. Hard. Hard. Easy. But really hard. You're probably spending a majority of your time hanging out with God. How do I know that? Look at every single person that God has for us and as an example in the Bible. We do hear some of their good times, but we hear so much of their struggles. Like look at Hebrews chapter 12 and Hebrews chapter 11 and the heroes of the faith section and how they got there. How did Job make from the Old Testament to the New Testament and the heroes of the faith chapter that he had made? Did you read his life? Did you see how difficult it was for him? Did you see that he lost his family? Did you see that he lost his possessions and his land and his cattle, everything? But did you see that he made a determination, even though he was going through a desert experience, he made a determination that he will never curse God. Even when his wife comes to him and says, why don't you just curse God, Job, and die? He writes the song, or well, we wrote the song, but he writes that phrase that you sing in the song over and over. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He gives and he takes away. But Job says, I will continue to say, blessed be the name of the Lord. That's how he becomes strong, even in the most difficult time of his life. He chose to focus on Jesus entirely, on God entirely. Instead of, we look at John the Baptist in verse 80, and I know there are some questions surrounded verse 80. There's some questions surrounding John specifically. God's going to use him for a specific purpose. His job is going to be to prepare the way for Jesus. He's going to tell people to turn from their sins, jump in the water, and be baptized, and be prepared for Jesus. That's what he's going to say. In order to get there, he has to walk through a desert experience. Maybe this morning, instead of looking at your desert experience and being really bummed out about it, maybe you can look at that hard time in your life, and instead of saying, darn it, I hate that side, which we do, you can look at it and say, okay, God, thanks for this difficult situation in my life. And then you can make a determination in your mind, I'm passing this test. I'm passing this test with the help of Jesus Christ. Okay, so we're going to end right there. We're not done because we got some baptism coming up here in just a second. But before we get there, I ask Miss Doris if she wouldn't mind coming. And I see she's got a helper who's coming with her. If you want to bring, I asked her to share a little bit about her faith. Hopefully we have a microphone that's working up here. Okay, he gave me the thumbs up. I'll get the chairs ready. Miss Doris, you can transition up. How about you sit on this side and I'll sit over here. Put you right smack dab in the middle. Oh. I don't know how loud this mic's going to be, but you'll figure it out. Can you hold this at the same time? Or, hey, how are you? Miss Doris has been with the Vine for 11 years at least. She started coming way back when we were in the office, or before then?
At the
center.
At
the community center.
Yeah.
I asked some of you know Miss Doris is originally from Kenya. I'll let her share all that. Miss Doris, how did you become a Christian? How did that work out in your life?
Oh, long time ago. It's been a while. I was born and raised in a Catholic home. My mother is still practicing Catholic. So I was raised in church. And then when I was at the university, my roommates, my first year of college, my two roommates, they went to a Protestant church, so to speak. And I went to them with church, and I think my second year of college, I gave my life to Christ during a small Bible study group.
Amen.
That was many years ago.
That's all right. That's all right. God used that college experience to bring you specifically to Him. I want to get to the miracle side here in just a minute. How did you find the Vine? Did you just walk by? I don't remember.
I did, actually. When I came to America, that was in 2007. We lived in Lake City, on Lake City Way. I didn't drive, I didn't have a job. So one day I was walking and I saw the sign saying there's a church that met there on a Sunday, and it was a walking distance. So that's how I ended up going to the Vine.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah.
So some of you may know that Miss Doris, you want to tell the hot pot of boiling water story?
Sure.
That was great. I mean, for me.
So this 2018 has been a tough year for me. Lots of things happening. But the specific incident the pastor is referring to is on August 12th. I had an incident with hot oil. I burnt the top of my left foot completely. And so that was on a Sunday. I should have been in church. That probably wouldn't have happened if I was in church. Anyway, so that was on a Sunday. And I was trying to avoid going to Harborview Medical because I thought, I'm going to have a pretty high pain tolerance. So I was, it was completely blistered by Monday morning. I went to the Everett Clinic, walk in, and the doctor there, she's like, you have to go to Harborview. There's nothing we can do for you. So on Wednesday, the 14th, I drove myself to Harborview Burn Center. And I say they're the trauma center because either you walk in with one or they give you one. I was not in pain when I went there. It was completely blistered, but it was not painful. And then I was told what the treatment was going to be. And that was just the beginning of a very long healing process. So there is no magic way to take the blisters. They just literally take the skin off and put me on pain medication. And every week I went back, once a week, they check. And 3 weeks into the visits, again, lots of pain medication. Like, I have, from my bedroom to the bathroom is maybe 5 steps. I could not make those steps without pain medication. It was brutal. So 3 weeks into it, I went there. There was an afternoon appointment, and this doctor walks in, and he tells me that in 3 weeks, nothing had closed. You can imagine or Google, but there was no skin on my foot for 3 weeks. Nothing had grown back, nothing had closed. It was just an open wound for 3 weeks. And from a medical perspective, he said, there's no way this is going to heal without a skin graft. It's either infected or it needs a skin graft. Either way, we need to do something about it. So I told him it was not infected and I was not interested in a skin graft. And one of the reasons I was not interested in skin graft is because I've already been out of work for 3 weeks in a lot of pain. Skin graft would have meant a second wound, which means another maybe month or so without going to work. Anyway, I was not interested. So they took a culture, 72 hours, they'll call me and let me know, this is a Thursday appointment. And we went home. They said, we'll call you if it's an infection and let you know, start. I had already taken like 2 rounds of antibiotics by now, just precautionary. And the next appointment was on Tuesday. So I left that appointment and I went home and I texted everybody I know, asking them to pray with me and for me. Because I did not want the surgery. And I knew it wasn't infected. I would have known. But if the only option was surgery, I'm like, no, God, there has to be another option. I can't afford to be out of work for this long. And the pain, it's like going back right to the beginning and starting healing again. So I asked everybody that, I know to pray for me and with me. And then on Tuesday, we went back for the appointment. And just shockingly to everybody, 60% of my wound had closed.
Amen.
So in 3 weeks, nothing had happened, and in 4 days, 60% had closed. The dude could not believe it, the doctor. He's like, what did you do different? I said, I did not do anything different. I did, the usual, change my dressing twice a day as I was instructed. And I said, I just asked people to pray with me. I don't think he was Christian. A couple of nurses were Christians, and they got it. Mm-hmm. And he said, that day, he said, the option of a skin graft is off the table. You don't need one. You're going to be fine.
Amen.
So this is on Tuesday. On Thursday, if you've ever been on pain meds, they say in about a week it starts messing you up because it's so addictive. We're talking narcotics, not Tylenol. And on Thursday of that week, for the first time, I woke up and put my foot down and walked without having taken medication prior to getting down from my bed.
Amen. And
I think within a week of that, I was off pain medication absolutely and completely.
Amen.
And it's not, nobody can explain it. I call it a miracle. I believe
Amen.
God reached down and healed me.
Amen. I believe it. Amen. I just want you to know that we appreciate you and we love you and we thank you for your story. And it is extremely inspiring. And I want everybody else to see that prayer actually does work, right? And it changes things. Physically, it heals. Spiritually, it taps you into the throne room of God. I mean, don't limit the power of prayer. Instead of thinking that it's a hard thing, embrace it. And say, man, I need this. So thank you so much, Miss Doris. I appreciate you. So awesome.